It's a pleasure to be here. I'm speaking to you from the unceded ancestral territories of the Lakwangan speaking people, especially the Songhees, the Husainich, and the Esquimalt indigenous peoples. And by starting with a land acknowledgement, I would like to just affirm my responsibility as a settler, as a racialized settler in this place, to support indigenous peoples to have their lands and lives restored. So I was asked today to talk a little bit about a book that I wrote called Hospicing Modernity and what is relevant of this book to philanthropy. So I'll start with that. And then I'll finish with more recent work related to repurposing organizations towards redistribution, reparations, and restitution. So the book is called Hospicing Modernity, Facing Humanity's Wrongs and the Implications for Social Activism. And the word modernity there, that's the first chapter, is who the heck is modernity? And modernity is a single story. It's presented in the book as a single story of progress, development, and civilization that is expiring. And therefore, hospicing is about giving palliative care to a dying modernity while offering prenatal care to systems that could be in gestation, but that we don't yet know what they look like, and that they could be wiser, but not necessarily. It depends on how we are going to hospice the old in order to be able to welcome the new. So the wisdom of the new system depends on our ability to be taught by the mistakes of the old. So modernity is expiring because its promises of growth and prosperity have encountered the limits of the planet. And the book looks at the impact of modernity on our thinking, the ways we feel and process our feelings, our scope of relationships and relationality, and even our neurobiology. So it talks about how modernity both has given us specific gifts, but it also limits our existence in the planet. And it looks also at how education has contributed to these limitations and how education can actually support us in overcoming these limitations and bringing ourselves together to show up differently to each other and to the planet. So in the book, modernity is sustained, the explanations that modernity is sustained through four denials. So the first is the denial, and these denials are socially sanctioned. The first is the denial of systemic violence and complicity in harm, the fact that our comfort, securities, and enjoyments are subsidized by expropriation and exploitation somewhere else. They happen at the expense of other people, other species, and the land. The second is the denial of the limits of the planet, the fact that the planet cannot sustain exponential growth and consumption indefinitely. The third is the denial of entanglement, our insistence in seeing ourselves as separate from each other and from the land, rather than entangled within a living, wider metabolism that is biointelligent, that is the planet. And the fourth is the denial of the magnitude and complexity of the challenges we'll need to face together, the tendency to look for simplistic solutions that make us feel and look good, and that may address symptoms, but not the root causes of our collective hyper-complex predicament. So in the book, which is actually the result of the work of a collective called Gesturing Towards the Colonial Futures, we use lots of stories and metaphors to be able to engage people in using different parts of the brain in a different with a different neurochemistry of learning with the analysis. So one of the stories we tell is the story that modernity of the house that modernity built. And in this story, we ask people to observe the different parts of themselves that relate to the story differently so that we can layer ourselves and understand our own complexity in engaging with stories. So this story comes both from the literature, critical literature, but also from the lived experiences of communities where the story was built and workshopped. So I will tell you the story, and I will invite you to think about and to observe the parts of yourself that relate differently to the story that I'm going to tell. So the story of the House of Modernity has four different parts. In the first part, we talk about the existence of a house on a planet, and the house is exceeding the limits of the planet. So this house is built on a foundation of separability, the separation between humans and nature. And it's an imposed sense of separation because we're actually not really separated. We're part of everything. But this sense of separation creates several implications for our existence, including the idea that as we're in terms of our life, we need to produce value within the economies of the house to be deserving of being alive. And then other species are also, the value of other species are also measured according to the value they can produce in certain economies within the house. So the intrinsic value of life is one of the things that this separability, the separation between humans and nature, it's one of the things that it erodes. The separability also creates hierarchies between, not only between species, but also between cultures and between individuals. So the worth of individuals is always measured within the house according to how they produce and contribute to the economies within the house. This house has also two different carrying walls. The first carrying wall is the carrying wall of the nation state. And we tend to think about the nation state as being created to protect people. But the history of the nation state is actually a history of protecting property and property owners, and the protection of people through the dispensation of rights like human rights, civil rights, or indigenous rights only happens when there's interest convergence between the protection of people, the interests of protecting people and the interests of capital and protecting property. Now, the other carrying wall is the carrying wall of universal reason. And this is the single story that I talked about before, the single story of progress, development, and civilization that creates epistemicides. It kills the possibility of aliveness for other stories, of other understandings of progress, other understandings of success, other understandings of development. And then we have the roof of global capital. It can take different shapes, but the current roof that we have is about speculative, shareholder, algorithmic capitalism. And this roof in this story is structurally damaged. For different reasons. I'm not going to go into them. In the book, we explain it a little bit more, but this structural damage is related to the irresponsible pursuit of profit for profit's sake. So that's the first part of the story. The second part is about the hidden costs of the house. So you have the house, we have unsustainable growth within the house, and overconsumption, and two arrows. One, extracting and expropriating things from the planet, the other one, dumping the waste back on the planet. And in the planet, we see destitution, dispossession, genocides, and also ecocides. So this second part of the story about the hidden costs of the house show that the house has been created, it's subsidized, and is maintained by social and ecological violence. Then we have the third part of the story, which is about the floors of the house. And here we played a little bit with the idea of global north and south. But at the north of the north in the house, we have the penthouse, where there is discretionary wealth. Basically, and historically and systemically, this wealth is created in the construction of the house. And then we have in the middle the stairs of social mobility of the north of the south. Then we have the south of the north in the basement of the house, people who do not have access to social mobility, who may not want access to social mobility, may want to build different communities, but still within the protection of the house. And in the planet, we have the south of the south, those who are fighting for a different kind of existence and who are receiving the sewage of the house in their territory. So here I would put, for example, the struggle of the Honikui people in the Amazon who are fighting against carbon trading or the financialization of nature, who are insisting that they are part of the forest, that they are the forest, and they do not want to live in a house. They want to continue to live in the forest, not because they are forced to, but because that is a healthier form of existence. And then in the last, in relationship to this third part of the story, we have the questioning and challenging of the idea of the promise of social mobility, universal middle class for all, that reminds us that if we had the same standards of living of the working class even of the global north, we would need many more planets. The estimate is 6 planets to live because the levels of consumption and production that are necessary for this consumption are unsustainable. And there's already an offshoot of the limits of the planet in terms of us consuming more than our fair share. Then we have the last frame of the house, talking about the structural damage of the roof and the weight of climate destabilization, biodiversity loss, economic instability, the cancellation of rights that we see in many countries, populist governments being elected because people want to protect their interests within the house, and a lot of precarity. So we have socioeconomic, political, mental health, and ecological crisis within the house. And then we see more violent conflict and mass and forced migration also in the planet. So the question here then, do we fix the house? Do we expand the house? Do we build another house? Do we live without a house? Or do we find another planet? And as we engage with these questions, we have also mapped 3 different ways that are common when those questions emerge, 3 different streams of perspective. So some people will advocate for soft reform of the house with more modernity as the answer to the problems of modernity, the same idea of forward, same kind of leadership, just small changes. So same usual questions, same answers. Then there's radical reform, more modernity, but different leadership and larger changes. Same questions, different answers. But then there's beyond reform, where it's acknowledged that more modernity is not an option, given the violence required to keep modernity in place in the limits of the planet. So here there are different questions and different answers. So I have looked at examples in philanthropy that could be going in the direction or gesturing towards the beyond reform of modernity. And I found a few examples, like the Kant Rasmussen Foundation that funds projects related to preparing people to address the social and ecological collapses that are already happening and that will intensify. There's also a group called the Wealth Reclamation Academy that is a group of fundraisers trying to work and encourage other people to work in anti-capitalist ways. There is a project called Resource Generation, working with the 10% richest young people in America, trying to get them to understand the nature of wealth accumulation and wealth creation and the violence that accompanies that, so that reparations can be possible in the future. And then there's the Transition Resource Circle that also works with both philanthropy and other organizations, looking at what else could we be working towards. And I came to know yesterday that there's an organization actually inspired by the Transition Resource Circle in the UK that has decided to take a step in that direction. So the Langley Chase Foundation will redistribute its assets over the next 5 years. So they say that after over 6 years of operating as a charitable grant-making foundation, Langley Chase has decided to redistribute all its assets and close within a 5-year time frame. And this is the justification. So they say, we have recognized the gravity of the interlocking social, climate, and economic global crisis we are experiencing today. At the same time, we view the traditional philanthropy model as so entangled with colonial capitalism that it inevitably continues the harms of the past into the present. We acknowledge our role in maintaining this traditional model and know that these times demand bold action from us all in charitable organizations. This is our response. Over the next 5 years, we will dismantle and close Lankaley Chase. We will relinquish control of our assets, including the endowment and all resources, so that money can flow freely to those doing life-affirming social justice work. We will make space to reimagine how wealth, capital, and social justice can coexist in the service of all life, now and for future generations. So I think that this is one of the best examples that I have that gesture towards the beyond reform of modernity, and that also work towards repurposing institutions towards redistribution, reparations, and restitution. So in order to wrap up the conversation today, I'll just show one of the features of a project that also went in that direction that I directed within the context of a university. So I was working at the University of British Columbia before, and there was an institute that was about to close. So in the closure and hospicing of this institute, there was a possibility to do something different. And therefore, we changed everything in the last year as an experiment, an educational inquiry. So we have a report called Moving with Storms that talks about the lessons learned in this material, like concrete experiment. And one of the things that we learned is that inviting people into the process of hospicing is hard. There's more and more people interested right now. And it comes with a lot of anxiety and a lot of grief also for the planet and for everything that's happening. So one of the things that we needed to do as part of the educational inquiry was expand people's capacity to sit with difficult and painful things without relationships falling apart, without people feeling overwhelmed and immobilized, and without people demanding a rescue from the discomfort of this experience. And we developed a set of invitations that really helped people to come to the space and to show up in a different way. And this is what I'm going to conclude my presentation with by sharing those with you. So it's an invitation for 7 steps back and 7 steps forward or aside. So the first invitation is for us to step back from our own self-image, to decenter our ego and center the challenge at hand. The second is the invitation for stepping back from one's generational cohort, to have a sense of how incoming generations may interpret and experience the challenges we're facing differently. The third is stepping back from the universalization of one's social, cultural, and economic parameters of normality to understand one's privilege as a loss of perspective and sensibility. The fourth is stepping back from the immediate context and time to see the wider historical, structural, and systemic patterns in the larger picture. The fifth is stepping back from normalized patterns of problem posing, problem solving, and relationship building to tap what is already viable, but unimaginable or unintelligible in the mainstream. The sixth is stepping back from the elevation of humanity above the rest of nature to consider our metabolic entanglement with the planet. And the seventh invitation for stepping back is stepping back from the impulse to find quick fixes in order to expand our capacity, not to be immobilized by complexity, complicity, and uncertainty. And here are the invitation for the 7 steps forward or aside. The first is the invitation to step forward or aside with honesty and courage, to see what you don't want to see. The second is the invitation to step forward or aside with humility, to find strength in openness and vulnerability. Number 3 is about stepping forward or aside with self-reflexivity so that you can read how you're being read and learn to read the room. Number 4 is stepping forward or aside with self-discipline to do the work on yourself so that you don't become work for other people. 5 is stepping forward or aside with maturity to do what is needed rather than only what you want to do. Number 6, stepping forward or aside with expanding discernment and attention, increasing care in proportion to risk. And number 7 is stepping forward or aside with adaptability, flexibility, stamina, and resilience for the long haul, to be prepared to fall, to fail, to have our plans shattered, to be stretched, to change course, and to find joy in the struggle itself rather than in the imagined prize or outcome, promised outcome at the end. So what I can say about my experience co-directing a program like this was that without these steps, without stepping back, people come with a lot of projections to the process, to the collective inquiry, and they come looking for certainty. And this is not the ways that modernity has trained us to look for certainty and to be uncomfortable with the uncertainty of the process really present several blockages to us learning to be differently together. So I invite you to have a look at the report. There's much more there in terms of our learning, in terms of trying to bring people together in an interdisciplinary way and in a multi-generational way, including students, academics, researchers, artists, staff at universities, and also emeriti. We had the college, the Emeritus College of UBC also joining the program and seeing the intergenerational conversations that happened and all the difficulties of this intergenerational relationships and the need for us to create containers where we can learn to expand our collective capacity to have these difficult conversations and sit with these complexities and difficult issues. At the moment it's like we're carrying the complexities on our back, and the complexities are because our formal education system doesn't teach us how to process all of this. So we're carrying the layers of complexity on our back, and they're becoming heavier as all the consequences of decisions of the past unfold. So what we need to do right now in philanthropy and education, in any other field, is to learn to do this movement and face and develop the muscles and the strength and the stamina to be able to hold the complexities in front of us and collectively so that we can approach all of this differently. And hospice, the system that is dying in order to offer prenatal care to what is possible to come next. So thank you so much for listening to me. I hope you had an amazing conference, and I look forward to engaging more. Thank you.